talking about things that you already know. And if that's the case, then I'm really open to having a discussion and a conversation with all of you. So please don't be shy. I'll stop occasionally to see if there's questions, and I'm very open to questions and dialogue.
And please put your question in. You can address it directly to Mariana, or if you want, you also can write down in a chat. And then, yeah, you can write in English or in Indonesia. I will translate it later in Indonesia.
Thank you, Ma. So I've titled this this short lecture, which I don't think will be longer than 30 minutes, What is a Lighthouse Farm? And hopefully we will be able to have a bit of answers by the end of it. I could finish very quickly by just giving you the definition here and say that a lighthouse farm is an exemplary farming system that radically redefines at least one dimension of sustainability. So I could close the lecture now and say, okay, there you go. Now you know what a lighthouse farm is. But I think that's still quite vague. So I'm going to try to go into a bit more detail in this session. Before I do that, I have a question for you, which is, what is sustainable agriculture? Before we even begin, I want to get a sense of where you're at in thinking about agriculture, sustainability. What is it for you? Oops, that shouldn't be there. Ignore this this little thing right there. Maybe you can throw it in the chat.
Ya, apa pertanyaan berlanjut itu? Kasih kata kunci. Sorry, it's mixed Indonesian.
All right.
What are the key words for the sustainable agriculture? Student, you can put in the chat. It said long-term agriculture. Yes, one responder.
I'm trying to, I actually can't see the chat.
You cannot see it?
No, because I'm sharing maybe. I'm trying to.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
but
I will read for you.
You can unmute yourself, or yeah, maybe Uma, you can read it out loud for me.
Oh, Shirley.
Shirley, yeah.
Please.
Well, I'm Shirley, ma'am. I'm from Agroekoteknologi UB. Correct me if I'm wrong. The sustainable agriculture is the successful management of resources for agricultural business to help changing human needs while maintaining or improving environmental quality and conserving natural resource. Maybe just like that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Great definition. Yeah. Okay, so conservation of natural resources. Absolutely. I see less chemicals. I found the chat. I see less chemicals, long-term agriculture. Definitely. Anybody else?
Rambutku, ya Allah. Ya astagfirullahaladzim.
Shirley.
Ini belum di.
Yeah, any other opinion, views? What are sustainable agriculture? I think last week I also gave course in sustainable agriculture. Oh, maybe not this class, yeah. Yeah, anything else?
Well, I think oftentimes, farming in such a way to protect the environment, absolutely. That's right, protecting natural resources. And we get this question a lot. Why am I asking you this question? We actually really get this question a lot from people in large companies and agri-food companies who want to know, we want to source our food sustainably. What is sustainable agriculture? How can we do that? And oftentimes it's a bit difficult to answer because honestly, sustainable agriculture is a lot of things. And nowadays we have a lot of terms, we have a lot of concepts, we have a lot of labels, and many approaches for them. So, for example, we have the organic certification, and that's a very strict set of rules that says basically what you can't do. We have terms like conservation agriculture, we have regenerative agriculture, agroecology, climate smart agriculture, low external input, as Johanna already mentioned, sustainable intensification, nature inclusive permaculture, biodynamic. It's sort of endless. And it seems like every year there's some new terms, like now carbon farming is also a new term. And oftentimes we're asked, which one of these should we as a company, should we as a bank, should we as a government support? And oftentimes these people who ask us this are looking for one answer. They're just looking for one term that they can say, okay, this is what we're going to do now. But unfortunately, what I hope you get out of this lecture is that the answer really depends on a lot of things. But I'm not going to be the one to explain that to you. I'm actually going to let farmers explain that to you. And so that's where the global network of lighthouse farms comes in. These are farmers all over the world, or farmer representatives all over the world, like someone we know right here, who have already figured out what the answer is in their context. They've radically redefined some aspect of sustainability to teach the world what agriculture sustainability can look like. And we find that in every corner of the world, there's a very, very different answer because there are very different challenges. And so I'm going to share with you now a few stories. I have 4 farms that I will go into a bit of depth on, but I promise you that we could spend hours, days talking about each farm and all of the work that they do. So if you have questions, please don't be shy. And Uma, right now I can't see hands or anything, so you'll have to let me know if anybody has their hands up.
Maybe Frelita and Johanna also can help because sometimes my internet is like freezing, something like that. So.
Perfect. So we go first to Spain, where starting in 1840, La Junquera was a thriving cereal farm and a village of over 120 people who lived there. But after a century of conventional intensive farming, a lot of tillage, there was wind and rain erosion that fully degraded the soils. So the people who lived there slowly started to leave. They were searching for better opportunities, higher paying jobs in cities of Spain. This is very typical rural exodus that is common all over the world, people leaving the countryside to move to cities. By the 1960s, this village of 120 people was down to 0 people. It was completely abandoned. Everybody had left. Until, that is, Alfonso, who is the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of the founder of this village, decides to take over this farm with his wife Yannick. And they take over these 1,600 hectares and begin to slowly convert it to a regenerative farm. And by 2012, they move there fully. They start a family and they begin to regenerate not just the soil, but also the village. They rebuild the foundations, a lot of the broken down buildings. They start to build back up brick by brick into livable homes. They also take care of their soil through good practices. They plant almond orchards. They introduce what is called swales, which are these carved out ditches at the end of a hill that can catch soil as it erodes down the hill. But beyond that, they offer many opportunities for young people to start their own projects and entrepreneurial activities. La Junquera becomes a type of hub where people can go, they can practice regenerative agriculture on the land. They can learn from what is now the Regenerative Academy, which is a type of school to teach about how to regenerate soil. And this enterprise has become so successful that now we have lost 2 students who went there to do an internship or a thesis, and then they never came back because they loved it so much. So they are reversing this trend of both soil degradation, but also rural degradation by bringing young people who would usually never go to such an isolated area, bringing them back, offering them opportunities. So regenerative farming in Spain was all about improving their cereal production. This was very important. So La Junquera began using different varieties of wheat and cereals with much deeper roots that could access then water, because drought is such a big problem here. So although these varieties had lower yields during good years, they were more resilient across the board because they had more stable yields during times of drought. So this allowed them to have over time more resilience. They also rotated these grains with legumes. So they used green manure to also improve the soil quality and reduce the need for mineral fertilizer. Beyond regenerative, they've also fully transitioned to organic farming. So they are also organically certified. They planted almonds and pistachios, which are well growing in dryland conditions and also can improve the soils by providing windbreaks to reduce wind erosion, by providing more permanent features on the landscape to also improve biodiversity. Same thing with aromatics, which they started to plant native lavender, rosemary, thyme, sagebrushes. They were planted between tree lines and on field hedges. These plants are locally well suited to the environment. They can survive dry conditions as well. And then they also help to promote biodiversity. So all of these combinations have allowed La Junquera to really thrive as a regenerative hub, where now many hundreds of people per year go to learn about the work that they're doing. But this is in a country, in an area where you have really dry soils. You have really hardly any rain. Does this apply in a country with a lot of rain? Does this apply in every country, the need for regenerative farming? Well, let's go to a completely different context, which is a small little island called Ireland. This island has a rich history of dairy production. We visited there last year in May and learned that they have traces of milk in some of their archaeological sites that are over 3,000 years old, meaning that there's been milk production on this island for 3,000 years. But today, the Irish agriculture sector is under a lot of scrutiny because of its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. So farmers are feeling a lot of pressure to reduce the amount of emissions from their dairy products. And they're looking for solutions to try to figure out how can we actually become climate mitigators, so actually start to sequester carbon as opposed to emit carbon. They're looking for climate smart agriculture solutions. So it's in this context that a team at Devenish's Lands at Douth began a journey to prove that it is actually possible to produce high amounts of dairy, which again is still something that's very important. They want to keep producing dairy, but at the same time be net zero, meaning that all of the greenhouse gas emissions that they emit, whether that be nitrous oxides, methane, or CO2, is also balanced by sequestration in the soil, by bringing the carbon back into the soil, into the landscape. So how have they achieved this? They've ripped out their wooden fences, like you can see here, and instead put really thick hedges, because these hedges sequester a lot of carbon. They are woody plants. At the same time, they've planted very diverse grasslands. In Ireland, it's very common to have just one species of grass, perennial ryegrass. But instead, they've diversified to 6 and even 12 different species of grass. And what that does is that reduces all of their mineral fertilizer, because now they have nitrogen-fixing plants like clover, but that also improves their biodiversity. It improves their soil microorganisms. You have a lot of deeper rooting plants, meaning that also that creates and builds up a better soil structure, can sequester more carbon that way. But they're not doing this alone. They have 5 PhDs that are working with them to improving that the results are having positive impacts for climate and biodiversity. They've also invested in providing habitats for species such as the rare partridge, that they're both doing a breeding program and improving the landscape for them. Oops. So here you have climate smart agriculture in Ireland, where a combination of multi-species swards, biodiversity preservation through landscape features, and also herd management, so even reducing the amount of livestock on the land, improving the breeds and varieties of the sheep, all of these combined practices to have a really holistic net zero farm that is also driven by research and science. Maybe I'll just pause quickly and see if there's any questions so far.
Yeah, any question you can put in the chat if you want.
If not, I'll just keep going.
Yeah, I have many actually, but maybe student first.
Yeah, I'll keep going and then we can come back.
Okay.
So this is Ireland, where there is this need for proving climate mitigation. But now what happens when we go to a completely different context again? Let me bring you now to Brazil, where our other lighthouse farm is. Here we go to the Atlantic rainforest, where we have one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. Brazil, similar to Ireland, is under immense scrutiny. But unlike Ireland, they're not under national scrutiny, they're under global scrutiny, because the world looks at Brazil as the lungs of the planet. They say, hey, Brazil, you need to protect your rainforest, you need to protect your biodiversity. And so it's in this context that we visit Fazenda da Toca. We went last December, almost a year ago. But as I walked around, it was really difficult to know where the farm ended and the forest started, because there was both farmland and also Atlantic rainforest on here. So 1 second, I was looking at this pasture of horses, and then I turned around and there was the most lush rainforest I've ever seen. Maybe for all of you in Indonesia, this is quite normal, but of course for someone from Europe, this was stunning to see how quickly the landscape could change into such a biodiverse ecosystem. And this is by design, because the borders here of nature and farmland are a little bit blurred. And Fazenda da Toca wants to be as nature inclusive as possible. They want to provide habitat corridors so that large mammals and birds can easily move through the landscape. And this is important in a region that's been known to be intensive monoculture orange production, meaning that you have only one species of orange is planted for many, many, many hectares. And the issue with that is that you end up getting a very intensive system that's highly reliant on pesticides, on fertilizers. You don't have landscape heterogeneity. So you have a lot of pressure on the resources on the land. And now, because of that, oranges are really, really susceptible to citrus greening. And a lot of farmers are losing a lot of their land to this fungus, a lot of their yield to this fungus. So Fazenda da Toca said, no oranges here. We're going to look at something else. And what they chose were Sicilian limes, because these, they realize, are more robust to the citrus greening disease, and they could find a global market for it, a good market for that would give them a high price. But as I said, it's hard to know where the forest ends and the farm starts, because they're planting these citrus not as monocrops, but as intensively diverse agroforestry rows. They've intercropped with species such as eucalyptus, cedar, and inga, a native tree. They used to also intercrop with banana, but they realized that the management of that was very difficult, so they adjusted. And now the banana functions as a border crop, which provides a windbreak and is also a habitat for beneficial insects. And their approach is really about diversification, but also about biomass production, because eucalyptus, I mean, again, you probably can see this in Indonesia, where you can practically see the trees and the plants growing with your eyes. I really felt like I could see the eucalyptus they're growing. It grows like crazy, so quickly. And what they do is they prune, and they build up all of this biomass. You can see this is a beautiful photo in the top right corner with just the thick layer of biomass they're building up. This is excellent for the soil. It provides a lot of nutrients back to the trees. So again, they can start to build up their organic matter. They can start to reduce their need for external inputs, because this improves the circularity. So really functional biodiversity. So in Brazil, you have organic agroforestry. It makes sense. The trees can grow really fast. They can plant trees just for the sake of pruning them. So you have this type of organic manure. High labor. It is high labor. It requires a lot of pruning and management, and diversification of crops. A really important approach to them. But now let's go not too far from Brazil. We'll stay in the Americas, but we'll go to the Caribbean here. We'll go to Cuba, another island. And Cuba has a really particular context and history, because in the 1990s, Cuba entered a political era called the Special Period. This is where a combination of geopolitical conditions, such as the fall of the Soviet Union, in combination with the US trade embargo, prohibited exports to Cuba. This led the island to face shortages of basic goods like medicine and especially fossil fuels. So what does the government do? They decide to ration food, meaning that every single family gets maybe 80 grams of bread per week or day. And they also encourage the use of low energy consuming technologies, such as ox-drawn plow, like you can see in this photo, low use technologies. And it's in this context that a family decides to leave the city. They said, we don't have anything, we can't find food, we want to grow our own food. So they said, let's move to the countryside. They moved to this land. Here you can see this photo was taken in 2004. And this family decides that they want to be fully self-sufficient. This is the Casimiro family, and today they have 11 members, and on 40 hectares, on 11 hectares, they are 99% self-sufficient in not just all of their food, but also all of their energy consumption. So they took they took this land and the infrastructure they have, and they started to implement climate adapted and efficient architectural building techniques. And this isn't with the fanciest materials or the most, high-tech tools ever. This is with really basic clay and natural resources that they could find, and also using green cover for their buildings. So they start to adapt their infrastructure. They also lean into agroecology. I'll talk a little bit more about that as an approach for them to reach self-sufficiency. And of course, they invest heavily in renewable energy, since they saw that if they are going to run a farm and a household at the same time, they need to be producing their own energy. So they have a biogas production, small scale, as well as wind turbines to help provide for their energy. They invested a lot in also water capturing techniques, since Cuba can go through periods of intense drought. So they dug ponds, wells, they invested in rain harvesting techniques, and also tanks. That isn't always common there. They can use the water now for the household all year long, as well as irrigating their crops. And in terms of agroecology, they focus on diversification, all the way from seed genetics, trying to have as diverse as seeds as genetic material as possible, because there you can have more resistance to diseases, but also at the landscape level, both spatially. So you can see here how they're row cropping, or we would call this even strip cropping, where you have a diversification across space, and also time. So you don't have corn after corn after corn, but maybe you have corn, and then you have carrots, and then you have a legume, and then you have a grain. So you diversify the rotation over time and over space. And all of these combined practices have resulted in this family being extraordinarily resilient to economic ups and downs in the country, to climate change also. So there will be blackouts in the whole country, but they will be able to keep their lights on. I see there's a question. Oh,
no, that's a question. That's
yeah.
Attendant, please.
So all of this is to say that within the Lighthouse Network, we have this mosaic of solutions. We have at the moment 13 farms. We have a new farm that is in here, which is in Serbia. And they try to capture together all of these farms, different approaches to sustainability, different solutions which are needed. Of course, in Indonesia, we look at complex rice farming systems. Who better to teach us how to farm sustainably rice than in Indonesia, I think. So we try to focus by working with local experts like UMA to teach us about what is sustainability in each context, and to embrace this diversity that's needed. So some of the farms are certified organic, but others are not. For example, in Ireland or in Latvia, or in Ethiopia, we have small-scale farms, like in Cuba, but we also have really large-scale farms, like in the Netherlands or Spain or Serbia. So it's not about finding one solution that can be applied across the world, but really embracing the need for a diversity and working with local actors to learn about what that diversity is. So if I go back to the question that I asked at the beginning, what is sustainable agriculture? Well, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. It depends, as we talked about, on political history, on climate, they should say soil type, not coil type, on soil type, on the historical agricultural practices, like in Spain, where the soil was highly degraded, on current and emerging challenges, like what does society want from our farmers? What type of solutions are needed locally? On economic situation, how many resources does a farm have? Some farms have more resources than others, so there's some solutions that are more sustainable than others. And also on other available resources like knowledge or even labor. In some cases, like in Brazil, you have a really high labor-intensive solution. And is that possible everywhere? Where maybe, but maybe not. So if there's one message that I want to get across today, it's really this, that there's a huge diversity of solutions needed, and to not believe that there's one, that there's we call it a silver bullet. There's not. We really need all of the tools in our toolbox to tackle the immense challenges we have, like our climate changing, the growing population, the increased vulnerability to pests and diseases, to less drought. All of these really huge emerging challenges that we have. We need all the solutions available out there. I'm going to say now just a few things about how we function as a network, because of course we bring these farms together, but how do we learn from them? The primary way, besides just speaking with them, is through students. So we have students conducting master's internship and thesis projects on the farms. We also bring the farmers to the classroom, sometimes virtually, like you see here, Alfred joining us. And the students teach us a lot. For example, Marika Smith this year conducted a really wonderful internship project where she took the approach of the Dutch lighthouse farm, who does large-scale strip cropping, and she applied it to the new lighthouse farm in Serbia, Log and Echo, because they said, this would be interesting for us. Could we do strip cropping on our farm? And what she learned through following this design principle that was developed at our group is that actually, no, it doesn't work to do it exactly how they do it in the Netherlands, where they're doing vegetable strip cropping. But what she suggested to them is they actually do arable cereal strip cropping. So these students that we work with can really teach us a lot about the farms and about possible solutions, and they can also help the farmers look at possible solutions. I also share a thesis report from a student who did his thesis with us in 2021, where he looked at what do the lighthouse farmers as individuals have in common. He compared the lighthouse farms in the Netherlands, in Finland, and in Austria, and found out that they actually have these 11 principles in common. They build local knowledge, they create visions and make sure that their social networks are all working towards that vision. They build trust with their local community, and all of these different elements that also helped us understand who are these extraordinary type of farmers that we're working with, and what features do they have in common. Very quickly, just some of the ongoing projects that we're working on, because of course we're not just a network of education, but we're also a network of research, and we work across multiple scales, all the way from looking at plant and animal interactions to really landscape governance scales, and everything in between. So we have projects in Ireland, we have projects on soil health where we're working with multiple lighthouse farms. We have a PhD student looking at Brazil at the farm level. We have a PhD student in Ethiopia looking at governance over there. And then we have this large strip cropping experiment in the Netherlands that's working across all the scales. So this is just to give you a little sense of how we work as a network. And here are some photos of the PhD researchers that we've had recently in action. And then I just have a few comments about the Lighthouse Farm Academy, which, as I mentioned before, we don't just teach master's students, but of course we have people from governments, from agri-food companies, from other universities who want to learn about what we have to teach. And so from that demand, we created the Lighthouse Farm Academy, which is a type of condensed education course that is focused on being at the farms and focused on partnerships with all of the research institutes we work with all over the world, such as the University of Brawijaya. So that will be launched in February. And then very final comments, I like to finish with photos of the farmers themselves, because this is who this is about at the end of the day. And the farmers we bring together in this network of exchange. And, we often get the question also of what's in it for the farmers? Why are they part of the Lighthouse Network? And I think what I always hear is that they really like to meet each other, to visit each other's farms, to get to know what sustainability solutions are out there. Because this is a group of people all over the world that are facing different yet similar challenges related to sustainability. And they like to know that there's other people who are also working on this and that they're not alone. So I'm just going to end it there for now. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see your lovely faces. And see if there's any questions.
Yeah, I think that's about Lighthouse Farm Network. Although Mariana only mentioned 4, out of how much is it now?
13 now.
13, 4. Just as an example of the farming practices in the member of this Lighthouse Farm Network. It's very each farm they have a uniqueness, but in common they put the diversity into their farm, but with different approach. For example, in how do you say it? La Junquera, the one in Spain, it's a really dry area, and they have a swale system. And then in Ireland, it's also different, and in many places. So if you have any question, please, you can put in the chat room, or you can directly address to Mariana. And we will also have them to visit Indonesia this year, maybe mid of this year or maybe earlier. We will decide later. So before maybe you will meet them in person, you can address your question now. There's one question there.
What are the most important steps to implement sustainable agriculture, and how can we integrate all aspects so that sustainable agriculture can be implemented without any bad risks left behind? This is a great question, Sarah. Thank you for asking. I'm looking if I can find your there you are. It's a really good question. I think I have to give a bit of a disappointing answer, which is, again, that it really depends. So, for example, you and I are living in really, really different contexts. So I would never tell this group about how to implement sustainability in Indonesia. I think what I can say that we're learning from all of these farms around the world, and what is very, very important, is that farmers are already under a lot of pressure, and that we should not be putting all of the burden to change on the farmers and saying, farmers, here, change your practices because you have to improve biodiversity for us. What we really see is that farmers already know what they have to do. Oftentimes they know, but they're under a lot of pressure from the price of commodities, to government regulations depending on the country, to social pressures often. So some farmers who take over from their parents, but their parents still want to keep things traditionally as they were before, to what their neighbors are doing. And that's really what we want to learn. We want to take these farmers that are already convinced that a change is needed, but what were the challenges that they faced? And sometimes it's as simple as an administrative challenge. In the Netherlands, we didn't have a subsidy system where it was easy to put 30 crop varieties in a field, because oftentimes we think about a field, one crop. But suddenly we had ERF that was doing strip cropping, and they had 30 different crops. And so they had to fill out 30 different papers for this. And it took a huge administrative load on them. So what we see really often is that the systems that we have around the farm are not designed to support the farmer.
Yeah.
And I would maybe, ask that question back to you. What is the context in Indonesia that is maybe stopping a farmer from implementing more sustainable practices?
Mhm.
Maybe Uma has some reflections about that.
Yeah, I think just the same as you said, yeah, there's no single answer on this sustainability, yeah. The most important thing, the key is the adaptation, yeah. So everyone has their own challenge, and maybe they have their own solution as well based on the characteristic biophysical condition. The thing is, some farmers, they have time to evaluate their condition, and some are not. Yeah, for example, in Indonesia, there's a lot of pressure in which actually their land is very, very small, even less than 1 hectare, and they need to feed their family, etc. So the pressure is much than in other countries, for example. So they do not really have time to evaluate their condition. So what it's needed is the help from like university, extensionists, and other people who can, like, for example, with this Lighthouse Farm Network, we can inspire farmers in Indonesia. So, yeah, sometimes it's they can just try one, but then again, it's a matter of adaptation. So, yeah, it's difficult question actually. It's look easy, but in practice, it's not easy. Yeah. So many people must be involved in this sustainability concept.
Yeah. That's another really important point, is that it's consumers, it's the banks, it's the government, it's the farmer, it's society, it's the neighbors, it's all of these people that need to be involved in the change. So I'm sorry, Sarah, maybe that's a disappointing answer.
Yeah, and every people, they can have their own definition of what is sustainable. Yeah. So it's come back to them again. If they feel, okay, now I have increased my farm income, so then we can say, oh, now it's more sustainable than before. Yeah. Or it's just if it's about the how do you call it, Pareto optimum. So it's just about the changes they make. Yeah. So sometimes it's difficult to measure, but of course there are some tool to measure it. Yeah. Any more question, students? No? Yeah. Actually, I'm also a bit curious about.
There's another question, Uma.
Oh, yeah.
In the chat.
From Amir. Yeah.
In Indonesia, currently farmers are very dependent on chemicals for cultivation. So farmers want it instantly, like pest control, fertilization. How to raise awareness so that farmers can use land sustainably in the future? Yeah, excellent question. I think this goes a little bit back to what I was saying before, is there's probably a good reason that farmers have, and I don't know if I can see Amir. I like looking at the people I'm talking to. But there's usually a good reason why farmers, need instant solutions. And maybe it's because they need income. They need to feed their families. And they're scared to take risks. Maybe, and I'll have Uma and her colleagues and even you sort of let me know if this is relevant in Indonesia, but something that we often see works very well is farmers learning from other farmers. So, as a researcher, we can tell a farmer, like, if you use less fertilizer and start using green manure, legumes instead, you will still have high yields. The farmer is going to say, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. But if a farmer goes to visit another farmer who's doing that as a type of demonstration and sees that it's really working there, then they're more likely to adopt different practices. This is also something that we see. I don't know, Uma, if you have a similar experience with the upscaling of the complex rice farming.
Oh, yeah, it's actually not only for complex rice farming, yeah. Is it still related to the question of Amir? Sorry, I was like, stop.
Well, I was just asking in general, sort of, if you see that farmers learn more from other farmers.
Oh, okay.
Regardless of what the practice is.
Yeah. The thing that is really significant to Indonesia was like, for example, the implementation of IPM to farmer field school. Yeah, that's the way of farmer learn from others, and it's also sort of like knowledge transfers that in a long term it's build the awareness of farmers to their environment, etc. So at least students also can have their role if you learn about the sustainable agriculture, etc. And then when you graduated, you work for extension office, then this is also your responsibility to transfer this knowledge to farmers. Something like that.
Yeah, so knowledge institutes, very important.
There are more questions, Mariana, one in Indonesian. It said, I've heard that ecosystem in line with economy. Oh, no, it just, the how do we call it, the contra between environment sustainability and economic sustainability. Yeah. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I have to keep saying it depends on a lot of things. These are really important questions, but it's so variable in every context. It's hard to give a. I think maybe something that I can say is there's often a short-term economic sort of dip when you implement a sustainability practice, because of course you have a system, for example, that's been that has evolved to be really dependent on external inputs, fertilizers, which quickly increase yields, pesticides, which quickly decrease pests. So you have a system that's sort of shaped for that. But what we're finding is really about resilience, and we're finding that these systems are not resilient to extreme changes, for example, in weather conditions, or as we saw during COVID-19 and shortages of external inputs. So what you have is that more environmental and ecological solutions are, as a whole, more resilient over long term. So if you look at it from a 10-15-year period, you have that your income maybe fluctuates like this, as opposed to like this. So, and like this is what you have with more conventional high input dependent systems. So it's really about the time scale, to evaluate the time scale, and to acknowledge that more ecological principles take a long time to actually reach a type of equilibrium over time, but do tend to be more resilient.
Yeah. I also agree. I also can understand the question from student because it's really Indonesian context where farmers only have very small land and even a very short, it really affecting their livelihood, their family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we really have to be very careful to implement it in Indonesia. So then it must be supported by many scheme, for example, with the aid from governments, for example, the aid with organic fertilizer, something like that. So then, with the price as well. So at least in the first or two cycle, there's no significant reduction on their yield, or at least can be compensated.
Or if there is, it's compensated. Yeah. Because there will usually be some kind of yield decrease. It's
Yeah, and there are still many more questions. We'll see if we can manage.
I have about 5 minutes, and then I have to go.
Yeah. I will pick the last. It's actually also important. It is in Indonesian. What is the role of animal in the lighthouse farm? Because for example, if you mentioned about the one in Brazil, they have so many biomass that it's a lot of pruning must be done to make it more nutritional cycle thing. But why they do not put animal? And the other way, like in Ireland, they focus more on animal than others. So how?
Yep. It's a good question. The animal question is very interesting. I think why in Brazil they don't do so they could theoretically graze in between the agroforestry strips, because the agroforestry is planted in strips, and so you could have grazing in between. And indeed, when we went to Brazil, we visited some farms that do that they have animals in between. Why Fazenda da Toca doesn't do that? They had a chicken an egg laying operation, and so they were actually using the manure from the chicken operation, which was also organic, to apply to the agroforestry system. So that was also part of their fertilization scheme. So they didn't feel the need to then also add livestock or ruminants to the system. The chicken part got sold. So I know that now there's been conversation of, okay, how do we bring some extra nutrient cycling to our system? And they've been talking about actually now bringing in ruminants. So it's a very relevant question that I think Jonas might have more to say about. In Ireland, again, historically super, super important, the dairy, and why I talk about, 3,000 years of dairy production in Ireland, because this is culture, this is context. So we're not going to eradicate livestock from Ireland, although that's what a lot of people would want because of their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to still have animals there. We're still going to have ruminants. So it's about figuring out how to produce animal products in a way that's sustainable. That often involves, especially in a country like Ireland, one of the proposed solutions that we're seeing is reducing the herd number, diversifying the landscape, practicing more holistic grazing, changing the type of grassland management, also feed additives to reduce the amount of enteric fermentation from the animal. So a lot of these practices. We have farms that are really highly dependent on animals, like the Lighthouse Farm in Latvia, that is a 3,000 dairy cow operation that uses the manure to generate biogas to produce electricity. The heat that is left over from that electricity generation is used to heat up fish tanks. And those fish tanks have sturgeon, which produce caviar. And they sell the caviar, and that is where they get most of their income from. So it's a caviar farm that is powered by dairy cows. Animals, very important part of that system. Then we have a very different system in also in Eastern Europe, which is in Serbia, that is 3,000 hectares vegan farm. They say no animals. They don't believe in animals. It's a value-driven company, and they say we want to produce food for humans. We don't want to produce food for animals. We think that in the future there's room for both. That we need both plant-based food and we need some animal food. And so we like to have that diversity and represent that.
Nice. Yeah, and I do really hope this person from Serbia can give like a guest lecture in UB next time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you still have time, or I think it's already 1 hour.
I think I have to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Mariana.
Thank you so much.
And yeah.
This was a pleasure.
Yeah, I think now we need to close the course, and then hope to see you in Indonesia. So,
I hope to see all of you. Thank you for sharing your time with me, and please be in touch. And,
okay.
And Uma, you can share or I can share more resources, like our website and so on, if people are interested.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Baik, teman-teman bisa live sekarang ya.